Getting worse as we go along. Thank you. You know, I had sound up on this thing. So with that, we're good to go. Karen? Well, at least you're here. Okay, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to recognize that we are conducting this meeting on the unceded traditional territories of the Hoopachessa First Nation, the T-Shot First Nation. We're grateful for that fact. I notice to attendees and delegates, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube on the Regional District website. Attendees can register to watch on Zoom. Questions can be emailed to responses@acrd.vc.ca. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting here. And because we're conducting our business in a hybrid format, we'll go around the table here first and then introduce those that are online. So I will start to my right with Councilor Sola.
Cindy Soldas. I represent the city of Port Alberni.
Good afternoon, Aklama Penny Cote. I'm the Alberni Clayoquot Regional Rep from Sprout Lake.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Freedy. I'm Protective Services Manager with the ACRD.
Afternoon, Mike Fox, City of Port Alberni, CAO.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Sion, the CAO for the ACRD.
Hello, everybody. Kristen Cardonahue, Administrative Assistant at the ACRD.
Director Beckett.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bob Beckett, Director, Area A, Banfield.
Director Ross.
Good afternoon, everyone. Susan Roth for Beaver Creek. Thank you.
Director Boyko.
Good afternoon, Director Boyko, Fred of the beautiful area of Beaufort. Thank you.
Mayor Minions.
Shari Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni.
Charlie Sterrett, you there?
Charlie Sterrett, Regional Fire Services Manager, ACRD.
Is that one Kristen? She there? Where's she there? Thank you. I already covered. I thought we did. Thank you. And I am Mike Sparrow. I am Director for Cherry Creek, and I am the chair of the meeting for now. So I'd like to go to item 2, approval of the agenda. Do we have any late items to add to the agenda? So moved by Director Cote and seconded by Councilor Solda. All those in favor? Opposed? Those carried. Any declarations? Conflict of interest? Seeing none. Keep on to that one. Minutes. Emergency Program Executive Committee meeting held on May 15th, 2024. Any errors or omissions? Move to adopt by Councilor Solda, seconded by Director Cote. Sorry. You're gonna have to round me. I'm terrible with these. No, we don't. All those in favor? Opposed? So moved. And we have presentations. No 10-minute time on this one. No. Emergency program update presentation by Karen Freedy, Protective Services Manager, and Daniel Seance, CAO. So go ahead, take it away.
Thank you very much. My apologies for the late start. We were having some technical difficulties, and you can see from the screen we still are, but I think we'll just have to ignore the black bars and dots and proceed anyway. So my apologies. Yes, this is a update on the emergency management program, and I've prepared a presentation for you. Feel free to interrupt, make comments, have conversations throughout the presentation. You are more than welcome. Wanted to give you an update on the emergency support services programs. We have 2. We've got the Alberni Valley team. It has currently 33 members to date for 2024. We've had 5 activations. We've served 20 evacuees and 11 pets, and our volunteers and Kathy, who oversees the ESS program, has put in 80 hours. And then we also have the Banfield team, which has 6 members in it as well. And both of these groups meet monthly for training and collaboration. They're involved in work bees. They do some public engagement programs throughout the year. And it's heavily supported by the UBCM ESS grant that we get annually. I wanted to, this was a slide actually taken from an EMCR presentation, and I just wanted to let you know that EMCR is really advancing and modernizing the ESS program, and part of that is offering and expanding different delivery models for giving ESS. So it used to only be in person, you used to have paper, and now with the large scale events that we've seen in our province, they're working on something called the evacuation and what's that? It's called ERA, Evacuation, Registration and Assistance Tool. And it's a digital registration. One of the things they're really working on is recognizing that people know what's best for themselves and giving them some more control over how they are receiving funding. So now there's e-transfers instead of referral forms. They still have kept all the old methods of referral forms and all the old paperwork, but they've done some advancement to do e-transfers and digital ESS registration. So folks have choices, and they've also let me move to the next slide here. They've done this new shelter allowance, which provides really a lot of flexibility for people to get their own hotel where they choose to get it rather than a hotel being booked for them. They're enabling the use of status cards for ERA authentication, which is great. They've offered a helpline number as well. So this is where the province is going with ESS. And I just wanted to show you this because this is really motivating us to learn and adopt this new ERA program. So when I look at our ESS grant for 2024, we're coming up on the close of it. It's ending February 2025, and we have purchased pretty much all the supplies at this point. We've did bedding and hygiene kits and pet care kits. So really increasing our resources and our capacity. And then what's left in the grant is our training. So Banfield, we're going to be doing specifically training for the Banfield team, and we're going to focus on registration and referral. And that team has really asked for training on how to open a reception center. So we're going to roll up our sleeves on that one and start moving some tables and chairs and really setting up what a reception center will look for in the Banfield area. And then you'll notice the Alberni Valley team is really focusing on that ERA training. So that's trying to catch up with some of the leadership that the province has provided so that we too can do digital ESS as well. And we hope to apply for the next round of funding, which will be coming up here in February 2025. And just one thing to note for this one is the province has increased the maximum allocation. It used to be $30,000 per partner, and now it's $40,000 per partner for this year. And again, this grant really focuses on readiness through increasing our supplies and our resources and through training. Does anyone have, before I move away from ESS? Yes.
So I just have a couple of questions here regarding e-transfers. So the e-transfers, are we talking about giving the money to the person who's affected by whatever emergency? And if so, not everybody has banking ability. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, absolutely right. So folks would have to have a BCE ID as well. So there are some hurdles, but that is one of them. And then also, yes, they do have to have the ability to accept an e-transfer. They can do the paper. We can still do the referral system, and we can still do a referral system down digitally. Those are additional options that didn't used to be there. So we can send referrals to a hotel in Nanaimo digitally and then send folks there. So they are layering the way that they're delivering ESS, which I do think is valuable. They're also giving folks more autonomy on how they spend their funds, which I think is extremely important to give people a sense of control over their own destiny. So I think they're making some positive steps. You are correct that you've identified a couple hiccups though, for sure.
And just to follow up on that, so we have some accessibility issues regarding that whole idea because seniors, if the power's out and that, there is no e-transfers unless you have a telephone. So I see some problems there regarding transportation, as you were just alluding to, that some people could go to out of the community and have a stay there, but getting there from A to B, and if the roads are blocked off or anything, there's another problem right there. So I just hit touching that. The next question, that's just a statement.
Mhm.
So the next question is, I think you've already addressed it, but just to make sure, lifespan of all the new equipment that's been purchased, right? We know there's a lifespan there. So how long is the lifespan of the equipment that we would have to replace eventually, even if we don't use it because things happen? And I know you mentioned grants, but grants don't always last forever. So will there be sort of like a contingency for future replacement fund regarding that? And the second question is the training. Do you want to answer the first or give you all of it? I do that all the time at City too.
I'm gonna see, I'm just hoping that I remembered, and if I'm forgetting, please re-ask the question. As far as the resources are concerned, a lot of it's, the bedding, the office supplies, the pet care kits, we are conscious of expiration dates, etc. So those things should last a very long time. The food and the water that we've bought, the food is a 25-year lifespan. The water has a 50-year lifespan. So we are making decisions around those lifespans and we are conscientious of it. The bedding and whatnot should last a long time, unless it's used, of course, and then we have to replenish these supplies. But we are really starting to build a stock. We are a much better place than we were 3 years ago. These grants are giving us we're using probably 15 or half of the grant at least for supplies and resource building. And the other half tends to lean more towards training. They have been extremely valuable, and you're right, we can't predict when they're going to go. So we've been trying to maximize it while we've had this opportunity.
All right, that's good. Last question. Sorry. Training update. So you've given us that there will be training and everything, but there's people who have the training, but they need to be updated. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? And I've said that before. So I'm just kind of curious, will there be where people can take retraining of some sort just to update themselves?
Mm-hmm. So our team trains every month. As far as the folks who are on their ESS teams, they're always in a place of training. And as far as our staff is concerned, we do have delivered JIBC courses regularly here through the EOC and ESS grants. One of the things that we're looking at doing through the 2025 work plan is developing some in-house just in time training. So doing some PowerPoints where we can deliver that training more on a smaller level with staff over more frequent periods, but less commitment of time. So maybe a 2-hour session so that we're doing it more readily and then having some of that in-house delivery. But every year we have done training with ESS for our staff as well as our volunteer teams. Yeah.
Director Cote.
Thank you. Through the chair, I know that I've seen the old supplies that we had of bedding and other things. Have we gotten rid of that, or are we still using that? And where are we storing all of these?
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you. Yeah, we had some bedding was given to us from BC Housing, and actually when we put it into practice, the cots were not very functional. And so we learned this as we were trying to set up a reception center. So we have since bought different cots and traded those out. So we actually had an ESS exercise where we had 3 different types of cots, and our team tried all 3 cots out and picked the ones that they liked the best. And then we made a mass order on some of our cots. So absolutely. Where we're storing things. So we have a CCAN in the Public Works Department parking lot. We have a CCAN at the Beaver Creek Fire Hall. We have a CCAN at the Sprout Lake Fire Hall, and we have an ESS trailer sitting at the Port Alberni Fire Department. So we have resources spread around strategically, but most of those CCANs are relatively full. And so we might be looking at purchasing some additional CCANs for storage with this upcoming grant.
Thank you. What happened to the old supplies?
The old, we've kept the BC housing supplies because we figure it's better to have some cots. So we still have them, but we bought different ones to buffer, and those would be the ones we use first. So we didn't get rid of them, but we aren't using them.
I have a question. Can you go back one more slide?
You bet. This one?
It says here to review rates and expand shelter options. What do you mean by that?
So the review rates and expand shelter options. So that's just, that's what we've been chatting about, is providing different ways that folks can get shelter. So one of the things is, you can get a $200 deposit now for shelter, and you can get your own shelter, or you might not choose to go get your shelter. You could go stay with your sister. My sister lives in Kamloops. Maybe my choice is to say, I'm just going to go live with my sister. So you can get an e-transfer for that $200, but make your own choices on how you get your shelter. And so, and then some folks might choose to have a more expensive hotel, and because they have the means potentially to do that. And then other folks might choose to choose a cheaper hotel and stretch that $200 per night a little farther. So there's just a little bit more flexibility with ESS than there has been in the past.
Sure that. Can you do one more slide of the one you had said 2025, go forward a bit?
This one here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so your ESS grant 2024 closes February 2025. I assume that's the end of the grant, but your ESA 2025 grant closes
Yeah.
2025. So does that mean the bid process closes? or
Sorry.
Okay, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, that was a good catch.
Tad confusing.
Yeah, no, the 2025 grant, the application deadline is due, I believe, at the end of January. It is coming up. We do have a little bit of time. But the new grant starts before the old grant ends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm saying like,
Yeah.
so that 2025 for the last one is a application grant, not a closing of the grant.
Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cause I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, got it. And we have Director Roth, her hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. You said that emergency supplies are kept in the CCAN and the Public Works Yard. Is that not within the tsunami inundation zone?
It is. We are aware of that. And we have chatted around ways that we can relocate that CCAN note with that knowledge. And we just haven't come up with a solution as of yet, but it is on our radar. And we've put one out at Sprout Lake with the idea we all know the bridge potentially could be gone. So then we put one out there, and then we're looking and hoping to put one in Bamfield as well this year. And we'll be looking at adding another CCAN within the city limits as well, because the population is so vast in the city.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions so we can proceed? Seeing none.
Okay, so we're moving from ESS to EOC, so Emergency Operations Center. And so much like the ESS, there's a UBCM grant that we receive, and we've been fortunate to receive for the last few years. And this has really bolstered our EOC equipment and supplies. So we've been able to get a lot of IT and laptops and cameras and things where we can talk virtually to people. We've been able to get new workstations, radio equipment. We've been able to get more storage for our EOC supplies downstairs. So if you go down to our EOC, we have new cabinetry that wasn't there before, and it's got new supplies in that. So we've really been able to upgrade our EOC with this grant. We have training coming up. It's called EOC in a Day. We've got 2 sessions of full day sessions coming up, and we're collaborating with the ACRD and the city of Port Alberni to run some staff through there. And we will be doing on December the 12th, we will be doing an EOC tabletop exercise and practicing some of the skills that we've learned in that training. So excited for that opportunity. And then much like the ESS, this one trails behind a little bit more, but the EOC grant application is in February. And again, they've upped their allocation from $30,000 to $40,000. So they are investing more money in the ESS and EOC grants than they've had in the past. Any questions?
Just a quick question. I believe I know the answer, but just, do we have a generator here because we have the laptops, et cetera,
Yes.
and a backup system on that too?
Yes, yeah, we're fortunate in this building to have that. And just for your information, we do have mobile EOC equipment as well that's stored at Beaver Creek Fire Department as well. And it's got 5 laptops and 5 different cases with all of our information in it. So if this building in an earthquake should go down, the Beaver Creek Fire Hall was seismically upgraded and it had a generator as well. So we felt like that was the safest place to put our equipment. So we can always go grab some stuff and then relocate into wherever in that scenario an EOC would be.
So we have the outlying areas in the regional district, and I know Spurt Lake has issues with sometimes with internet and stuff like that. So how would that play into it for communication and or where?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. I mean, if the internet goes down and the communications go down, it will be challenging. There's just no way around that. And there's no real backup plan to getting the internet back, other than that's where the amateur radio group starts to come in. And as they like to call themselves, they're the last resort, right? If we're using the amateur radio club, we probably have likely had an earthquake or something that's caused some major impacts.
One real quick question. Don't you have a 5G connection between Beaver Creek Fire Hall and here that does not use the internet?
Maybe I'll let Charlie answer that, actually.
Your Charlie's there. And then we have Director Boyko after this.
Yeah. Charlie, are you able to answer that question?
Or could you repeat the question for me, please?
Don't you have a 5G connection that's wireless on top of your hall to go to this hall or to this connection here?
The radio club has a system set up that they can communicate between all the buildings. If that answers your question.
Yep, I thought they did. They don't need to have the hardwire internet. They can use the towers, right?
They can use the radio communications, correct?
Dr. Boyko.
Just comment you were just talking about, there's radio communications, but no data. Is that correct?
Sorry, couldn't, yeah, there's no radio connect.
The radio club
There's
actually
radio
has-
communication between the fire halls and the trucks, but there's no data connection, correct?
Correct. There is no data. The radio club can provide data also on their network between the EOC and the fire hall at Beaver Creek. And not sure where their other connections are, but they do have that ability.
Okay, so this brings me to my actual question here. I just wonder if there's some aversion in the ACRD to modern technology such as Starlink and things like this, because in the recent Hurricane Helene thing in North Carolina, the Starlink was parachuted in, dropped in, immediately gave internet access to all affected people. There was thousands of them put in there. Why do we not have that capability? And when we looked at putting internet into the airport a year and a half ago, instead of getting a terminal for 500 or $1,000, we spent $70,000 on very slow internet. I just wonder why we can't use modern technology. Thank you.
We can use modern technology, and certainly the option for Starlink is something that was discussed and will continue to be discussed. It really just comes down to budgeting priorities at the end of the day. Sometimes it's grant criteria. The ACRD has pretty much gone down the route of grants for equipping most of our emergency operations rather than straight taxation. But you are absolutely correct in terms of the introduction of newer technology. It is not beyond us to bring in Starlink, and whether we keep it stored or activated, and there's a carrying cost, but it's relatively small. It would help communication. So hopefully that, oh, it doesn't answer. Here's a follow-up.
It'd be good to have something pre-prepared, and there is not a lot of carrying costs for it. It just seems that we can be more advanced. My question next, my follow-up is, if we get grant money of a certain dollar amount, are we only allowed to buy certain things with it? Or can we add modern communication technology into that in the future? Thank you.
Through the chair, every grant is a little bit different, so we follow the criteria of the grant, where it's possible to go get that additional communications or anything along those lines, we can certainly slide it in. It's all depends what we prioritize when we draft the grant, as well as what is prioritized in the framework of the provincial grant.
Councillor Sola?
I actually like the idea of Starlink, and it's something to look into and not just leave it on the desk, because then we'll wish one day that we had it. I'm just kind of curious to know, have we ever looked into it and the cost it would be? And can we piggyback with others, like maybe we can sell a little bit off, I don't know. How does that work?
Yeah, it isn't a huge cost, and you can pick up Starlink at Costco now. And so different EOCs have certainly used it. We haven't advanced that yet, but it's, like I said, something that we can throw into the 2025 budget, or that we can bring forward in a future grant. It's not uncommon for it to be added to trailers and whatnot. When I was working elsewhere, certainly say in the town of Qualicum Beach, Starlink is on the ESS trailer, and that's just the way they run it. But again, it all depends where conversations go and what gets prioritized. I think what I'm hearing right now from this conversation is that this group would really like to see that prioritized.
Do we need to make a motion on that to refer it back to the ACRD board? And if it's not Starlink, then something equivalent to it. I mean, to investigate it first and see what the cost is would be great. And the pros and cons of it would be interesting to have.
We can certainly do research, but my understanding is that in the absence of Starlink, which is independent, we look at more like satellite phone style things, which are much more expensive. A resolution is always good, because a resolution just helps us keep track of what was resolved in advance. So if you want to make a resolution, recommending that the board support the purchase of a Starlink system as part of our EOC in 2025, that would be welcome.
So then I'll move that, but I would like it to be investigated, the pros and cons for the board to, when it's referred back to the ACRD, to get more information on it too, would be a good thing too. So I'll move that.
So we have a motion on the floor. Are you seconding the motion?
I'll second it, but I have a
Second.
comment.
Okay, seconding, and you have,
Yes, a question. So through the chair, could that not be part of our grant that we've received to pay for that?
It may be possible, because I know that radio communications were part of the EOC grant. It may be possible. I would just have to read. There's a very clear eligibility list and ineligibility list, so I can take a look at that.
if I may comment, because I'm the chair. Actually, one of the better places to use this will probably be on the rescue truck for the city, because you go out of towards Banfield and up the hump and all that, where there's crappy communications by radio, and you'll be able to see the pros and benefits of it. And the newer ones are auto trackers. So if you have a new Starlink, it will automatically find the nearest satellite. But they use them out in the bush right now on a lot of logging trucks, and they have them on for performance. So they go in the bush, they can do their paperwork in the bush. It'll automatically find the satellites, link them back to the place. So there we go. I have Director Boyko's hand up still, and then I can go to you first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hardware is $500 to $1,000 and $180 a month. So I'm sure we can find somewhere in the grant and make that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Solon.
I just love it, how he's all over it. So when you talk about the city and the fire trucks and that, and a Starlink on top of that, is it one Starlink Or do we need more than one Starlink, right? Like, how does that, I'm not sure exactly how that works. So that's why it would be great to have that when it's presented back to the ACRD, more information on how does it work and if we have to purchase one or two or three, or each fire truck has one, is that a better thing?
Daniel, go ahead.
We'll add that to the research.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor in a second. Any more questions on the motion? All right, no questions. Vote. All those in favor? You can vote too. Opposed? Wonderful. Carried. Okay, thank you. Shall we keep moving on?
Okay, so I just wanted to highlight some of the training that we've been doing. There was a number of staff who took the EOC Essentials course, so that was a pretty, it was a 2-day comprehensive course on Emergency Operations Center. Staff from both organizations attend the Community Evacuations course that was held in Ucluelet this year. We had staff again for both organizations attend the Fire Smart conference. Staff went to ESS conference and took a ESS director's course. And we hosted a wildfire tabletop exercise that was really well received. We had over 70 representatives there. And we went through a tabletop exercise and it was a really great exercise and really comprehensive. So we hope to do that again this coming year. And we attended the Wildfire Coexistence in BC Symposium as well. So upcoming, we still have, and I've mentioned it, but we still have some ESS training coming up. We have some EOC training coming up. There's a conference in Penticton in 2 weeks. It is the Building Resilience Community Conference. And I'm just highlighting that the policy group is having some training as well coming up on the November the 27th. So a lot of initiatives around training, and we will continue to do so and prioritize training.
Are any questions? I see no questions. You're doing a good job. Good. Good luck.
This slide is really, I just wanted to highlight a lot of the emergency preparedness and public awareness initiatives we've been in through. This is just a small list of a bigger list. So these are some of the events and marketplaces and areas that our staff went to promote, whether it be Fire Smart or emergency preparedness. And we've been attending open houses and meetings and whatnot. So getting out into the community and getting more active and trying to spread the word of emergency preparedness, whether it's for wildfire or any other of our hazards. So does anyone have any questions around the?
Councillor Sola?
Honestly, it's a quick one. Just a quick question on the education. How about senior homes and that? Do we reach out to them? Because when I remember when the tsunami came, we thought we were going to have a tsunami. Senior homes was a big one. And how do you get them out fast enough, right? So.
At this point with our capacity, we've really been more responding to requests for us to come and talk rather than initiating ourselves. So at this point, there has been no request. So no, we haven't yet. I entirely agree. I mean, anytime we can get out into the community and chat about how to be better prepared is a good idea. So that's a group that we could and should chat to, but we have not as of yet.
I would like to see that be done because they're so busy in their day-to-day life that they don't think that there's going to be an emergency. And I just remember making some calls to some of the senior homes. That was like 15 years ago type of thing regarding, you know, there's a tsunami warning. You need to act on it. So I think it's something we should do.
Are there any more questions before we move on? Hearing none.
We're just highlighting there that we had Shakeout in October. It was a really great campaign. So under some of the desks are city staff and our ESS volunteers. And then the photo in the middle is our ACRD staff at our muster point for our earthquake preparedness. And so we have 3 annual campaigns, I guess you could say. There's Emergency Preparedness Week, Tsunami Preparedness Week, and then Shakeout. So those other campaigns come up in the spring, and we work with staff and then do public engagement as well to try to get folks engaged in their emergency readiness. So we have designed and created the Alberni Valley evacuation route brochure. And unfortunately, the brochure that went out in the agenda, actually, we just noticed right before this meeting, it was the wrong one because it looked as the road went right across Sprout Lake, which we have since fixed. And I just wanted to show you online here. So this is how it is now. You'll see that that correction's been made. It was flagged to us earlier. So it was just a technical error, but so this brochure aims to chat about emergency evacuation routes, and I will just put my screen back to here we go. So we provide contact information for Sashot, Hupecheset, the city, and the ACRD as well. We try to define what an evacuation message is because there's the alert, the order, and the rescinding. And so we really explain those messages. We chat around what people should do before, during, and after an evacuation. We highlight the importance of Voyant Alert in our emergency program to communicate, and ways that people and things people can do to reduce their disaster risk. So this brochure hasn't been printed yet. It is in its final stages, but I just wanted to bring it before you to see if there was any comments around it. And the first page that you would have received in the agenda is correct and it is finalized. It was just the map and that one specific road that went over Sprout Lake that was since edited.
Director Cote and then Director Boyko.
Thank you. Through the chair. So the map, in my opinion, is incomplete. I'm just trying to find, I have difficulty sometimes with our new website, trying to find things. So the evacuation route that has been identified previously by the regional district talks about a escape route evacuation at the backside of Sprout Lake, and it's not on this map. I'm very concerned about that because I keep bringing this up, that the province is looking at deactivating the road back there. And that is, in my opinion, one of the escape routes that needs to remain open and supported. So just want to bring that up. Thanks.
Daniel?
Through the chair. It's fair point, and we have to follow up, and we're really at the mercy of the province on that one. And we can update the map if and when we get there. The challenge is that if we identify the route and the province doesn't maintain it or continues along the path of decommissioning, then we're misinforming the public on what's available. And so the routes that we have identified are routes that we're certain of. The Kurt's Crib sort of angle to this is one that we still have work to do with the province in terms of how we would ensure that it remains open and accessible and maintained.
I do. So then this map is misleading because it says that Sterling R Main goes and then it stops. It's a dead end. So from this map, it's sending people out that road and there's nowhere to go. So just to
In
follow
which
up
case,
with
then
that.
we can follow up with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to Director Boyko.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad the map is not exactly the same as one from 13 years ago. There are some new roads on there, so thank you for that. One thing on the old map is it had arrows. Now, I grew up in this valley and I know exactly which way to go, but there's a lot of people moving into town, and when they see a map with a bunch of lines, it should say go this way or this way. And the new map has no arrows on it, just to make it more obvious. It's good to see the fire halls on there and the government buildings and things like this. And there's an extra tsunami warning siren on the Tashat Reserve. However, we put a shelter spot for horses and animals up at the fall fairgrounds, but there's no shelter for people identified here. Now, I know there's some shelter facilities that we've used in the past, such as Echo Center, and I know there's some set up for the future, like Beaver Creek Hall Community Center. How come we're not identifying where to go in case of a shelter on the map? Thank you.
I can address that. You're correct, and that is intentional. We don't have any of our reception sensors on there. We have 7 of them in town that is identified in our ESS plan. But we don't want to put them on the map because they're not necessarily activated, and we don't want to mislead people. We are prepared for 7 buildings and facilities in our community. But depending on where the hazard is and our capacity and our staff capacity, we might be opening only 1, maybe 2, and they might be in different locations for different reasons. So it is intentionally not in there because that is something that would come out in the Voyant Alert message and our social media and official with our spokesperson to say, this is the building that is open, this is the reception center, and go here. And so people are not going to a building that is inactive.
Thank you very much. What about the arrows on the roads? Is that something we can add in there later on? Or we're assuming that we don't want to send people towards a fire? And then basically the map is just a map. It's not an evacuation route.
Yes, it is intentionally, again, it's intentionally not necessarily telling folks which way to go because the hazard would really dictate which way we would want them to go. And just for your information as well, this map and the streets that have been identified came out of the ACRD, the Alberni Valley Evacuation Route Plan that had been approved. So we didn't actually make any new decisions as far as what goes on the map and what roads are highlighted. The roads in orange are considered the main roads, and that was on the evacuation plan. And then the secondary roads are in black. I will definitely give your comment some consideration. We didn't put the arrows down so that there's more flexibility around decision making. I'd be open to other feedback if you think the arrows belong.
There's only 2 main ways you want people going in and out of the valley unless there is a problem. They're either going to Tofino, Hewlett, or they're going to Nanaimo. If it gets really weird, then they're going to go cut all the locks, and then it's going to be a free-for-all all over the place. So by not having arrows on here, you got to send an emergency message of say, I want you to take Smith Road to DeBow to Batty to Cypress to Cowley to Pearl Barney Highway and up there till you get to Nanaimo. It would simplify things. It used to be like that on this map, and now it's all gone. So if you don't know what's happening and exactly what part of town you're in and where the problem is, and you can't get the message and you have a map, then your map's useless. I'm just saying that. Thank you.
I want to put clarity through confusion on this one. One of the reasons you probably don't have the arrows is, imagine there's a big earthquake and all the bridges are out. Arrows would lead you towards bridges and to get away from them. Right now, the city has 3 bridges. Bodie has 3 bridges. Cherry Creek has 4 bridges and Beaufort has 5 bridges. I don't know who's going to quantify that the bridges are intact after an earthquake, but by putting arrows on maps, you may direct people to a bridge that is unsafe and there cause a problem. So I understand what you're saying, but until you know what's happening, where's it going? If the bridges are not intact, then we also have different response zones. And like the ambulance will be stuck on one side of town, which takes back routes. Cherry Creek could be isolated, Sport Lake would be going nowhere, and Beaufort would be on its own. So until we figure out what's going on and how it's going, arrows would cause more difficulty than they would resolve. So just a thought on my part. And I believe we have Councillor Solder would like to talk.
I look at it, I'm sure if there's an emergency, the roads would be blocked. I mean, the city and regional district would block those roads. You can't access them. So that I just wanted to give my 2 cents there. The other thing is the voyant alert. Do we know how many people are registered? Because I'm sure there's not everybody in the regional district is, which includes the city, totally registered. So hopefully with the voyant alert, it will alert, but some people are going to be left out. So I'm just kind of curious, do we have any stats there?
We do have stats. I'm trying to search my brain to find the exact stats, but I want to, we're in the neighborhood of around 4,500. Yeah.
I don't know how a person can get more of the message out because the message, I send it out, but that's only a small amount of people and I talk about it all the time, but I don't know how else to get it out to the people to how important it is, unless there's an emergency and you watch everybody at the last minute will try to download the app.
No, let Daniel talk, and then we'll go to Fred after Daniel.
So I just want to comment on 2 elements. So on the voyant alert, that's actually a good comment. That we might be able to make it a little more obvious in terms of live updates. Please download the app and we can put that on the map if we can find room. So it'd be a bit of a logistic thing to take a look at. That way people know to download. And the other thing in terms of the introduction of arrows, I mean, something for consideration is we could still have the west, east, and southern routes leaving the valley. So we could indicate if there's an arrow saying this is the western route leaving the valley, this is the eastern route leaving the valley, and this is the southern route leaving the valley towards Bamfield. We could put those arrows on just to give people a general indication of which are the primary routes out of the valley. But again, I think it would really be important to make sure people understand live updates in terms of open and accessible routes will be posted online or download the app Voyant Alert. And I think that might be a good way of sort of helping beef up what we're talking about here.
Sure, I'll go to Councillor Solder and then I'll go to Director Boyko.
And I love that, but then again, I worry too if we don't have the power or our phones aren't charged or there's so many ifs and I'm just throwing Pandora's box out. So we can do a lot of ifs.
Director Boyko.
Thank you, Chair. I think there is lots of ifs involved here, and it all comes down to getting yourself prepared as much as possible, getting generators and stuff like that, practicing them, and reducing your reliance on the government to tell you what to do. I think having the main routes marked in and out with an arrow is a good start, Daniel. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go to Karen.
And I'll just comment, just follow up with a comment around, that's why we did do a panel around trusted sources. And as we know, social media can be very quick and not all of it is correct information. So we are pointing people to local governments and First Nations to provide their information. And also you'll see below some provincial resources and that Emergency Info BC, that's one that gives live updates on state of local emergencies and also road closures, and then Drive BC there. So, and then we'd be using our radio system and all of our networks here in town. So, I would say Daniel's right. This is a printed version of what folks would need to look for live information, and we'd be using social media sites and the radio, et cetera, to bolster information and give updates.
Thank you. Director Cote.
Thank you. Through the chair, in our supplies that we've just purchased, do we have signage? Because if there is an earthquake and the communications are down, we're not going to be able to access any of that. We won't be able to see the map. We won't be able to see the arrows. But if we have signs with arrows, and a plan for volunteers to take, or staff, to be able to take out signage to say, this is the way. This is the way to our shelter, this is the way to out of town. With those individuals, is that part of what we've got a grant for, and have we made those purchases or a plan for those, that type of emergency action? Thank you.
That for signage would probably be under the public notification and evacuation route grants that is available through UBCM. In my time, we haven't purchased any road signs, but I do know that the city of Port Alberni has an emergency trailer at the Public Works Department that does have road signs, barricades and whatnot prepped for such events. I can check to see how well supplied, and perhaps we can apply for a grant to bolster some of that signage.
So for somewhere like Sprout Lake, the fire department would be equipped to be able to step up and help out, because we have a number of bridges and shelter plan. So I'm sure that we'll have people midstream in their travels on the highway that won't be able to get beyond where they'd like to if their bridges are out. So some signage is quite essential to make sure that people are aware of what happens, and a follow-up with the community to actually have a plan with the volunteers, not just the fire department, I think is quite important at this point before things happen. Thank you.
Councillor Solda?
Yeah, this is the theater part coming out in me and directing part. So have we looked at doing the scoop and doing like a little scenario where right where we get the call, there's an emergency evacuation, so people know the steps, and that's where the downloading of the the Voyant alert system. We get the Voyant alert. Here's now, let's go get our bag, and here's what we should do. And I'm not talking about just earthquake. I'm just talking about an emergency system thing altogether. So get two little actors or family actors and do the whole follow-up. And here's where we go. We listen to the Voyant alert and we take evacuation wherever we're going. So it's just a little scenario.
I can answer that. It is a good idea. It was discussed. So last year during the budget, there was a proposed initiative case that identified the option to do short educational videos as opposed to just a print. That didn't make it through the budget process, so it was not added. We can certainly bring it back for discussion this year.
Director Roth, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of make an observation here. It sounds like we're talking more about minor emergencies, or maybe not minor, but you know, not a very serious emergency, because I would imagine if there was a large earthquake, there would be water mains broken, power lines would be down, you know, you wouldn't be able to use the road, and it'd be much different than the way we're talking. Just a comment. Thank you.
And I would say that our emergency management is an all hazards plan. So our plan is an all hazards plan. So it does take into account small emergencies up to large scale disasters. And that is really where the live communication will really come into play, because depending on the scenario and what's happening, the advice from the EOC could be to shelter in place for reasons you're speaking of. So we have a number of tools in the toolkit, and which ones we deploy would depend on what the circumstances we're in.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any more questions? Seeing none, move on.
Okay, fantastic. So talking about communications, this was a good segue. So we do have a grant. We did receive it. We were successful with the public notification grant through UBCM. Our partners are the city, the ACRD, Sashat First Nation, and Hoopachesset First Nation. And our goal is to develop a unified regional plan for communications. So the objectives are to develop key standardized hazard-specific messages. So specific messages for floodings, ones for wildfire, ones for tsunami, already standardized, and our hope is so that all governments and First Nations are putting out the same message at the same time, and because we're all in a small community and we don't want to be creating confusion around putting out different messages. So we're trying to create some standardized messages that go along with some graphics. So we're going to be trying to create some graphics that can bolster our verbal messages through graphics on social media. One of the things we're trying to do is identify who needs to know what when. And so who are the key contacts and who do we need to communicate with and get that written out. And maybe not by name, but by position or role so that it's not needing constant updating as far as being specific to name. And what are the triggers to disseminate information? So one of the questions I have, I get a lot of updates, particularly right now from EMCR around wind warnings, heavy rains, things like that. And it's like, what are the trigger points in which we're communicating with elected officials, staff, the public? And so trying to establish when X happens, we do Y, and trying to make that a little bit more clear. And then building some templates so we have some better rapid response. So one of the things that we have even just with public notification is we have a flood warning, and then we're creating right now our messages somewhat from scratch, but we're creating them again and again. And so wanting to build some templates where we just have the information, we can grab it really quick and get it out to the public. So this is something we'll be working to do in the next 6-7 months, and I'm looking forward to having this on all of our shelves.
Okay, thank you. I'll go first this time. So one of the things we had last year was when we had the road closure, getting updates to the ACRD was slower than listening to it on radio or any other place. So I know you have to wait for like official confirmation to get through all the steps, and they were sort of circumventing you. What are you going to do in the future to hopefully get unified so we can get the same sort of messaging out that doesn't seem conflicting?
That was a challenge because we were trying to wait for official word from the lead agency. And so what was being put out on radio wasn't necessarily inaccurate. It just hadn't been officially released yet. And so we were in a position where we didn't want to not follow the lead agency's information. However, it was appearing as that we were behind the 8 ball, and that was a challenge for us during that incident.
So what's the future steps, or is there a future step?
We've had quite a bit of discussion with the province because that is the lead agency, just to put a label on it. We know that the province has shared that they're updating their various like Try BC sites and whatnot, modernizing them and looking to streamline. Now, a year ago when we had this discussion, we then had a road closure, which was a colossal flop of what we had just discussed, where there was things that we'd agreed upon that ended up not rolling out. So that discussion is ongoing. My request still stands to have a written procedure that the province also adheres to, which allows us to make faster decisions, faster issuance of signage and whatnot that we have, and understanding what the links are between the province and ourselves in terms of where decisions are being made. So that is not yet in place, but it is part of the discussion that is on the table.
Thank you. I have Director Beckett, and then I have Councillor Solbach.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at the emergency communications strategy and we talk about partners, I'm wondering, and help me with this, why RCMP and BC Ambulance Service are perhaps not part of the partners. Yeah, I've heard the term lead agency brought up, and I bring this up because, as all of you are aware, Banfield tragically lost two individuals a couple of weekends ago on the Banfield Road. And as the elected official representative for the community, the only way I'm finding out is through Facebook. And, you know, Heather, our staff member, did her very best to try to confirm information for me through the RCMP, and was not overly successful in being able to confirm what I was looking for in order to respond in what I thought was an appropriate fashion for the community and the families. So I just want to make the point that communication is critical. I'll stop there because I'm not sure what my question is, other than I found this last incident not only personally upsetting, but difficult to manage, given the lack of information from an agency that I think should be part of our emergency communication plan. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Bob. I was just taking some notes with that, and I'll follow up with the RCMP. I know we have a new commander, and I've not yet had the opportunity to meet with her. And so that's something I will flag. I think one of the challenges that we have as a regional district is we actually don't own roads. And as a result of that, we tend to be forgotten in the mix of road managing agencies. And so it's an important reminder for us to provide both to MOTI, ambulance, and RCMP that even if we don't own the road, we are a key agency that needs that information. So I wish I had a better answer, but all I can say is I've added it and we'll certainly follow up.
We'll go to Karen for an answer, then we'll go to.
Well, I don't have an answer, but I do have a comment. I too was receiving information on Facebook as well. And I didn't unfortunately know that there was a fatality until the Monday when I came into work, and I received correspondence from Heather. So there was definitely a gap of communication on this. And so we can look at it and try to make some improvements for the future. I think if in the case where an emergency operations center was open, we would be able to connect with the RCMP as we would through our usual liaison position, but the EOC was not open and we were unaware that there was an incident on the road.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Well, I just want to concur with what Bob just said. Sometimes as an elected official, you're the last to know, because either social media, you find out from social media, or just people in general call you, hey, tell me what's going on. There's an emergency. We're fortunate because we have a good CEO who normally just sends us a text and saying, this is just to let us know what's going on. But in the past, it's been like, we're the last to know. And I hate being the last to know, because when you get the phone call or somebody's asking you a question through email and you're going, I don't know anything, you feel like you're not there because you're not connected. And it doesn't mean that we're going to release the details, because there's things that you can't release. And our CEO tells us, this is what we can release and here's what we can't, right? So I think that's really important. And again, I just don't like having egg on my face, not knowing what's going on. And I just want to agree with Bob and support that.
I have Director Cote and then Director Boyko.
Thank you. Through the years that I've been on this board, there's been multiple crises.
Yep.
Either transportation on the highways, airplanes down, on the water, fire. And the elected officials seem to be the last ones to be able to reach out and try to comfort our communities. It's really difficult when we're excluded, and Facebook and the media in general is providing the community the information, and not always probably in the best light. I think that as emergency planning operations come from through the regional district, I think that the agencies really need to take heed that we need to be a part of this, of the solution, as far as reaching out and making sure that the community stays calm and stays informed as best that we can. I know with the fire at Sprout Lake and Dog Mountain, I reached out myself to the Forest and Wildfire Center and made a connection. And that really helped because it wasn't coming from this office, which was really unfortunate. We did discuss it at our briefing afterwards, but it's really important because we're elected by the communities to be a spokesperson or representative, and people actually come to us asking for information and we don't have it. And we say, okay, we'll call the regional district, but there's nothing here either. But then they get information off of unauthorized agencies. Thank you.
Sure. I would say that it will be good for us to define in this community strategy the scope of what we're communicating on. I think it's important, and I'll probably say this a lot over the next little bit, but really understanding what is an emergency and what isn't, and then not, because there's so many things that are being moved into a managed emergency world, whether it's housing or social impacts and factors, or medical issues and whatnot. So I think it's important for our group to just keep in mind what is an emergency and what isn't, that because I'm trying to do that myself, and EMCR defined emergency in their legislation, and so I've been leaning on that as far as what is an emergency and what is not. So that helps me stay in my box. And then also with this community strategy, I completely hear what you're saying, and the elected officials were not going to be forgotten about in this strategy. It was always the intention to come and talk about the trigger points on when you want to be informed and maybe when not. There's a lot of information that comes through EMCR, even just about heavy rain, and it's hard to find the balance, whether it be elected officials or the public, on when too much information is too much information and it's always coming, and then you get complacent even with the public more around, or whether it's not enough information and we need to do a better job of putting out information. So we're trying to strike that balance. So I'm hoping this communication plan helps us do that collectively, because I need to hear from you as well. Yeah.
I have Director Boyko, and then I have Councillor Solomon.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to echo the same sentiment of the last four elected officials, that when you read through the 175-page document in detail, which I hope everyone did in preparation for this, an official spokesperson is mentioned twice. ACRD board and CPA council, depending on scope and location, specific members of the ACRD board will form a policy group, and this involves blah. How do we define what an emergency is? How do we pick the specific members? How are we going to elect the official spokesperson to talk to residents? We need to flesh all these things out, but I agree that currently, as it stands, the elected officials are basically tossed to the wolves on what's actually happening. And we get better information from Facebook and whatever else is out there, and friends and family, on what's actually happening than what we get from staff. And this document that you go through here is going to perpetuate that and keep that going. When we talk about sending out too much information to people, we just released another survey an hour ago about ACRD parks. And that went out on Facebook, but it hasn't been sent to any directors or anything yet. And we don't even know there's a survey. And we got how many surveys that are open right now? 3 or 4? We're sending out lots of information, and we need to figure out how the best way to get realistic, trusted information out there. Talk about trigger points like we just did. What triggers an emergency? define it properly, and make it as obvious as possible. But the way it stands right now, the elected officials are left to fend for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councilor Soda.
I feel like a frenzy of dogs. You're trying to get information, the food. Anyways, just to talk about, so I've been on council for a long time and I have emergency when we had portfolios, emergency was one of them for me. And I think Karen, you were here at this time too, when I remember when Ken McCrae had his finger on there's no button, but let's go that way, a button. Do we call a state of emergency because of all the flooding that was happening in Port Alberni on Third Avenue and Beaver Creek and that? Do we call, and just houses were under, like right up to water line and everything like that. So he didn't call it, but, and then there was the EOC was called in, and not all the policy group was called. I was part of it because this was part of me here. And just some of us were called in, and that's when we had issues with the telephone lines. We couldn't call the West Coast because everybody was on the cells, and that changed. All this changed. Again, not all council was told what was going on, or I shouldn't say council, I'll say elected officials. So that's where I want to touch in, is everybody should have been informed what was going on. I mean, we knew about it. And so there's been a lot of times there's been calls, and not a lot that the whole policy group has been called. After that, a lot of training was happening after all that. And Karen, you were here for all that. So it's been an interesting to see where we are now to where we were, and how we've been moving, but we're still not there yet. And we've had books out there to say who was communications, who was what, but it changes because staff changed so many times that it wasn't kept up to date. There was one at City Hall, a manual, and one here, and different things, but it's really hard to nail who's in charge of what, and because up changes. So I just wanted to give a perspective from going way back.
Daniel?
So this is all great feedback, and I think it's, I'm just going to flag that the regional district is quite new to emergency management as well. So I know some of the emergencies here we're going back, predates us having staff in that role. And so I believe, we started down the emergency management path in 2020, which was a year before I started. And until then, or up until that point, up until 2020, we didn't have a dedicated staff person. And now we do. We have one in ESS providing support, and we have one that's coordinating the efforts. And then we have a grant person for FireSmart. And so we've really built what we've had over the last 4 years, and we're still fine tuning. And I think this is where the grant that we have for communications is looking to provide clarity along those lines. I'll also flag that we're new in terms of our coordination with the city, and our exploration and how we actually partner with various agencies, whether formally through an agreement like we have with the city, or informally like we do with, in some cases, with the nations, or just through our relationship as we do with the FINO, but more formally with Ucluelet. So all of this is relatively new over the last 4 years, and we're continuing. So it's all good. It's all good feedback. But I also have to put it in the context of what and how we've been investing into the system and when we've started. So there's a balance in terms of how much we can do across the region in forging these informal and formal partnerships, and what we're implementing. I'll also flag that over the last 24 months, there's been almost a complete overhaul of the provincial emergency response system, which we're also staying on top of. So it's a very dynamic area, and the feedback is noted, and we'll continue working towards the objectives that are identified.
You want to follow up? You want to follow up?
So I remember, Karen, and maybe you can go back since you've been here with me, and so is Penny. there used to be a call out, like everybody who was on the, like the policymakers and everybody that needed to be called, it would just, there would be a call, a button, and somebody would call, and then they would fan out the whole call to everybody that was on that call list. Do you know about that, Penny? Do you remember that? And I'm just wondering if that is still there. So if there's an emergency, you know which one I'm talking about.
I think you're referring to Connect Rocket. Would that sound familiar? It's a different version of like a Voyant Alert, where you can fan out and talk to many people at once. The policy, and I just on that note, the policy group is in the Voyant Alert system. So if we needed to activate the policy group and bring everyone together under an emergency, there is that button, as you say, that button to push through, and it would go through Voyant Alert. I'm not sure if
I'm not sure I don't think it was that. It was something else. I can't remember, but it was back then, and it actually really worked. So it just would call out. It doesn't mean we come out, just we're on standby. That's all. It was just to say, hey, this is what's going on. It just took care of it just blanketed everybody. And I can't remember what it was.
I guess, thank you for that. Okay, we have Director Roth and then Director Beckett. We have a very quiet Director Roth.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Myself personally, and I know that a lot of people that I work with feel the same way, and there's too many emergencies. I don't even look up from my work when I hear a siren because there's so often, it's just overwhelming. I receive emergency alerts through my email often, like especially in the winter. So it feels like an overreaction sometimes. And I think that by the time a real emergency happens, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't listening. So I like the idea of better defining what an emergency is for the ACRD. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You have something to say, Karen?
I'll just follow up with a comment that there is such a thing as that risk saturation, where you're hearing it so often that you do start to tune it out. And that's why that's why I was mentioning that kind of fine balance between not providing, I don't want to say not providing information, because of course we always want to provide the information, but not so much so that now we're tuning out the sirens and the alerts and things because it's like, oh, that comes up all the time. So you're absolutely right in that point. And then we do need to be informed. So where's that magic spot and that's what hopefully this communication strategy can start to find for us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. If you want to chaos, it looks like you hit the tsunami sirens in the middle of the day and you will see chaos. So I've been there and done that. It's not fun, but Director Beckett.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment, a clarification on, how I initially identified that I didn't have the communication necessary in my mind to allow me to respond to the community and to the media. I want to clarify that, and I also want to pick up on a comment that Daniel made about the staffing that we now have in place, and I'll go back to clarifying that it was an outside agency that I felt could have been or assisted. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. Could have assisted us a bit more in providing some information that would provide the clarity that I was looking for. With respect to staffing, Heather was nothing short of amazing, getting back to me, working with, attempting to work with outside agencies, working with Chair John Jack. And I was so grateful that we had a staff member in place that could attempt to do all the follow-up, provide information that would allow me to accurately speak with the media. So I just wanted to make that comment that my comments were not intended to be critical of staff. If anything, I am grateful that we have that staff in place that can assist and provide us to the best of their ability with the information that we need. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any more questions before we move on? All right, we can move on.
Thank you. And so as we move on, another initiative that we are undertaking is this West Coast Emergency Cultural Safety and Awareness Plan. Our goal is to develop a regional plan that would reduce the likelihood of unintended harm. So pleased to say that at the moment we have 9 interested partners. So Sashot and the city, Uchucklacet, Huayet, Tofino, Ucluelet, Ucluelethat, Toquat, and the ACRD at this moment have going to be working together. And our objectives for this grant and it is through a grant, actually, I should say, it is through the Indigenous Engagement Requirements funding that came through the province. And the objectives are to improve cultural awareness, to promote inclusivity, reduce disparities and inequities when accessing resources, broadening traditional knowledge, recognizing diversity, and fostering a shared understanding of cultural safety or culturally safe emergency management practices. And this is very much a part of our new legislation, something we believe in. What we would like to create is a better understanding of when we have a reception center or group lodging site, or when we're applying some emergency practices, how do we do it in the safest way so that we protect people from harm across all cultures. So that is the intention of this grant. So we're looking forward to moving along for next steps. Fire Smart. So our Fire Smart program is nearing the end of its cycle. It's going to close in end of March, beginning of April 2025. So this grant was a 2-year grant, and it allowed us to have a Fire Smart coordinator. We've been able to do a number of home assessments and rebates. That's been a very popular program, as is the residential curbside debris removal program. We've been able to do critical infrastructure assessments and do some of the mitigative work around those assessments. We've developed a community wildfire resiliency network, done a number of public education events and campaigns, and participated and led a lot of training opportunities. So we're nearing the end of this grant, and we're looking to hopefully apply for another grant cycle, which would be over a 2-year period. We would like to put in our grant on January 2025. Our intention is to continue with the programs that I just listed above and to continue with the training opportunities. Changes that we're looking at is potentially with expanded objectives. We're looking at potentially having 2 different positions for Fire Smart. We're looking at doing fuel treatment plans. And we must do, according to the rules of the grant, is we must complete our community wildfire resiliency plan. So I just put in the box there, the requirements for this grant are these 3 things. If we don't complete these 3 objectives, then we don't have access to the grant funding. So we have to have a Fire Smart coordinator, we have to complete our CWRP, and we have to maintain our community wildfire resiliency network, or we will not be eligible for grant funds.
Thank you for that. So we have to put these things in place before we ask for the grant, or put these things as part of the grant?
So we have a grace period where we get to put it into our next grant. So the CWRP, right now we have a CWPP, and they've accepted that. But as soon as we get our next grant, that has to be top of the list of things that we have to accomplish, is to do our CWRP. And we can put that in our next grant cycle, and we can ask for funding for that within that grant cycle. But we have to do it for this upcoming grant cycle.
Thank you. And you said 2 positions. So would they be in the field positions, or would one be a granting position and writing up this plan?
So we're looking, our Fire Smart Coordinator has been extremely busy for the last 2 years, just doing the home assessments, the critical infrastructure assessments, and the residential curbside pickup program and all of the public engagement. And it has been a full-time job, and he's worked very hard and did an extremely great job. And some of these things to be able to go into the fuel management and more of that mitigative side of wildfire resiliency, we feel we need another position so that somebody can work on that while still maintaining the programs and whatnot that he's already established. So to have that extra growth, we need another position to work on that, those objectives. Did I answer your question? Oh, sorry, all grant funded. Yes, yes.
Sure,
I
yeah.
missed.
My question was basically, you know, two people in the field, and one person will be an office person supporting the person in the field was sort of the question.
It would be both people in the field, both people in the office. If that makes sense, because one of the Fire Smart coordinators position would be very much working with the public and doing the public engagements and doing the home assessments. So you are out in the field, but then the other position would be working with partners and different agencies and really bringing a group together at the table to try to work towards our fuel mitigation.
Thank you. And two vehicles probably too. And Councilor Solar, do you have a question?
So just to go back to the two people, full-time, part-time, what are we looking at? I'll stop there and ask my next question right after.
Thanks for giving me one question at a time. I appreciate it. We are looking at 2 full-time positions, but that will be completely based on the grants allowing us to have those positions. So if we only are approved for one position, we would have to relook at what we're looking to do for our grant to adjust it accordingly. But we hope to apply for 2 full-time positions.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking, there's been a few events I've been at where our Fire Smart reps been there and there's been 2 people there. So is that picked up by the ACRD or how is that work out? I've seen somebody else there, so.
It might be dependent event to event, but it could be that our protective services coordinator had joined him in that. It could have been some ESS volunteers potentially as well who joined, or in the fall fair, we did have ACRD staff at a booth. So a little bit of everything.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question, did that not work out well, or is it just because we've grown? How is that working?
It's not that it doesn't work out well, it does work out well, but this is different work. So what we're talking about is continuing that program, and we have the one Fire Smart person that is traveling the entire region. And so we want to keep that going. There's still a lot to be done there. But when we talk about the community wildfire resiliency plan, we're actually talking about looking at community resiliency and creating those buffer areas. So you're looking at negotiation with various agencies, property landowners, people like Mosaic and whatnot, talking about the coordination, sharing of information and data, and making sure that we're clear in terms of what areas we're identifying as priorities for treatment. And so it is a completely different animal really that we're now introducing. So that's why it's 2 jobs, because we don't want to give up the residential and commercial aspects that are going on a property by property basis in exchange for doing this larger work that has to be done. Is that fair to say, Karen?
Okay, just to follow up, and the last question, do we have stats on the coordinator's work, like how much removal of debris, how much he's done public education, like, do we have all the stats? That would have been great to add that into, and the training, and anybody that volunteered, the volunteer hours or other staff hours.
We do, through the chair, we do have those stats. And I mean, the intent of this today was to provide a high level. So our Fire Smart does provide a detail. He does, we have invited him a few times to be a delegation or report to the board table. We can certainly do the same for the city if need be. He has all those stats, and as part of the grant, we have had to collect a tremendous amount of statistical information. So all that is there And yeah, the intent today wasn't to do a deep dive into FireSmart, but we can certainly and have in the past provided that information.
So I have no problem with the grant part of it at all. It's just that when you're asking for another person, it would have been great to have the stats here too, so we could look at the whole picture. You know, I know you're giving me a high level, but when you ask for another, it would have been great. It just my thing here.
And I'll just comment, and I don't have the stats with me, so I apologize, but we have done more than we anticipated in the home assessments and also the critical or the curbside residential program. We reached out to UBCM and asked if we could shuffle some of our funding from one section of our grant to another section to accommodate those programs to continue because they've been so robust. So that's good news for our community because the catchphrase of FireSmart is FireSmart begins at home. So that's really the basis. So it's so wonderful that folks are picking up on those programs. And we have been working with a contractor in town removing, and we do have how many people in which jurisdiction, et cetera, have been using the program.
Thank you for that. I have Director Boyko and then I have Director Cote.
Thank you, Chair. Are we voting on this position right now, or is we're just getting information that this will happen in the future, and then we're gonna get full statistics like what Director Solda is looking for, so that we can make a more informed decision? And then at some future board meeting, then we'll actually vote on this position.
Yeah, no, you are not voting on this right now. This is for your information. And this is the direction that we're going in terms of the preparation of the grant. And this is the timelines that we're following in order to achieve that. So there's, like I said, this is a high level overview for you. You'll have another opportunity to get into the weeds in terms of approval. But this is what we intend to draft as a grant because there are some gaps in there. And what we intend to do is continue doing our work, which is 100% grant funded. But we can't do all of the work with one position. And we intend to share that as part of our next grant application, is that if we're going to continue FireSmart in its expanded way, then we evidently need to talk about expanding our resources, and we would expect the grant to cover those costs because it is beyond what is in our jurisdiction and beyond what our local taxpayers should be paying for.
Just as a follow-up, Daniel. So the vehicle that was set up for this position was a very expensive 3/4 ton pickup on a very high expensive lease rate of like $2,500 a month. Are we going to be able to get something cheaper in the future now that we have more time and it's not COVID anymore? Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, that would be our expectation. I think the challenge that we have, or the challenge that we had with that vehicle, was that there was nothing available, and so we ended up with a vehicle that was what was available at available rates. Certainly that has changed, and again, grant funded, but we don't want to be wasting grant funds either. You know, like let's be honest, we're always looking for the best deal to suit our needs, but unfortunately, that one was the only thing that we had available.
Okay. Is that it, Director Boyko? I guess, okay. Director, I'm sorry. Director Cote.
Thank you. So I'm a question around the FireSmart coordinator and what the future projects would be covering. So we're already covering residential through programs, and is this looking at Mosaic was mentioned, so private land ownership outside of what our jurisdiction, like that would be the province and private land, which is not residential. So is that what we're looking at? Trying to put resources to working with them, because the province very much sets the limits of what we can do and what we can't do. And I think it's basically a waste of time. I think that we should be lobbying otherwise.
The grant for the next grant cycle has now includes green space, and that didn't used to be there before. So that is some areas within our control that are owned by the city or the regional district, and trails and things that we can help fire smart. That wasn't a part of the grant in the past. So that's one part of it. And then the fuel treatment plans, we will be looking to collaborate with Mosaic and private landowners, as well as the province, as well as other landowners, to try to develop fuel treatment plans. But we will probably likely or possibly may only be able to execute fuel treatment work on our own lands potentially, but we would like to work with the groups and try to collaborate and network together to try to better protect our communities.
So our lands would be our parks and trails, basically, fire hall properties, that type of thing. I think there's already plans, like it should be in our parks plans and already implementing Fire Smart in those areas. Thanks.
Well, with the a community wildfire resiliency plan, we're looking at our communities. And so at the end of the day, how do you create a buffer from wildfire for your community? And this is where we get into these larger treatment plans. And so it's hard to create that without talking with some of the largest tracts of land that are out there, which in some cases it's us. We have, but in most cases, you're looking at coordination with the province, coordination with First Nations, coordination with companies like Mosaic. And part of that coordination would mean that if we're to implement any of these treatments, so it's one thing to plan it, but if we're to implement, then we'd be looking at yet another grant, and we'd be looking at an area that is pre-identified, that is already agreed to with a number of different agencies, and then working forward from there. So it is rather comprehensive, but how else do we create sort of the concept of these community mitigations if we're not talking with those owners of the largest tracts of land?
Follow up. So because the province and forest management have already have prescriptions, it feels like it's already set in stone, basically, by the province or Mosaic or whoever, as to what their plans are. And I don't know that we have any ability to make any changes. That those are policies and things that the province already has, like they're already there. So I'm just having difficulty trying to get my head around why we're going at this when it should be the province that should be taking it on to start looking at fire smarting their own land and making those policies for private land and working with First Nations. Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
Through the chair, I just wouldn't mind adding a little bit into different areas of work across the province. We have worked on Crown lands, on fuel mitigation measures in interface zones. And we've also worked with private landowners, such as Mosaic, or in these cases, it wasn't Mosaic directly, but I know Cumberland does work with Mosaic on trail networks and signing long leases after the area is cut to create a park space or allow trails. And some of these areas were taken on by nonprofit groups, such as bike riders or hikers that would also help with that. So these were grants that were fully funded from the province to do the mitigation work on their own land. But it needed to have the information from the municipality on where the interface zones are, what was the critical infrastructure that it was saving, etc. I know Kimberly, when I was there, we won several awards for this, going around with the ski hill and other types of crown and private land. So I think it is a complex idea, but we really have to focus on where are the threats to the different communities. If a wildfire was approaching, who's the owner, and we have to identify all that, and then we have to seek the grant funding, not actually for us to pay for.
Thank you. Sprout Lake, there was a Fire Smart grant given to the Thunderbirds. And they did some remediation or whatever, fire smarting to part of the property there. Right beside the community hall where they fire smarted. It seems like it's grown up again. So ongoing, like it's, yeah. I just have a hard time with fire smarting when we don't really have any abilities thing.
Yeah, through the chair, the ongoing maintenance is an issue, and that's why a lot of local governments will partner with biking agencies, et cetera, to maintain it after it's been done. Otherwise, the follow-up isn't done often, and historically hasn't been able to get re-grant funded for that area again. But I'm not sure if things have changed since that time, but that is historically on the interface work. Once it's done, then you're expected to treat it after that. And that's where creating park space, creating and activating the area in some manner, and even on private land, coming up with some MOU or however they do it. I know Fernie has done that as well. And they've worked with a bike society, and people can name the trail that they do, but then they have to upkeep it while it's going to fire smart standards. So it is complex. I'm not saying I have all the answers for it, but it would be an interesting process for this area because the vegetation does grow back very fast here, not like other areas that I've lived in.
I could keep going. That's the sort of where my mind's going. Hiring one person to do something, I think it would be better integrated through things like the parks commissions that we have. Would really like to see a regional parks take off in our area, and I think that's something that they could sort of help to support. But just having one person, that's, yeah. Well, I'm sure this conversation will come up again. Thanks.
And I think like Mike has answered very well, and this is the complexity of where we're going, is that in a lot of instances, we're heading in directions and doing things that need to be done. But after a grant is done, it doesn't land in a service. And so by default, we end up having these larger discussions about, what do we do? What are these services? Should we be creating these services? And this is why every year when we come back, the conversation expands, and it's an important conversation to have because it's, we have to think about what happens after we do this work and what happens if the province says this is as far as we go, and if we want to go there. And I know, like, for example, we talk about Kurt's Crib. It's a great example. What happens when a forestry company decides to decommission a road? Are we equipped as a regional district to step into that space? Today, we're certainly not. And the question has to be, do we want to be equipped? And if we are, who are our partners? Who's involved? Who's part of that service? Who benefits? There's so many questions for us to explore, and they're not easy conversations. And so, but nonetheless, I do think it's an important part of what we do is to initiate these discussions, take the opportunity, even if it's a provincial responsibility. Who better than our own local partners, local owners, local residents to have the conversation, if not us? And the province could drop a decree and say this is how it's going to be, and we'd probably all grumble about the province. But I think we do a better job of having that discussion and at least lobbying or guiding that direction. So it's an unfortunate reality, but I think we're best suited to have the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for the patience for Director Roth. Go ahead.
Thank you. At one point, a few years ago, I was a cartographer for the Ministry of Forest, and I drew up maps that contain fire breaks and, all kinds of things to prevent fires from entering into communities. It's definitely the Ministry of Forest's responsibility to make sure that, there aren't interface fires with communities. Also, private forest managed lands, companies like Mosaic have a responsibility and all other landowners have a responsibility. It's actually a duplication of work to put it on local taxpayers. So I'm kind of agreeing, well, I am agreeing with Director Cote. We don't need a duplication of work, really. We got to be smart about this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My turn? Okay, so. I know. Good. So I'm looking at this and they say looking for 2 positions next year, which obviously means you overworked yourselves per se into, right? So if you're a business, that'd be good. You're saying, hey, we're growing. Which is good. So hopefully we can get 2 people. Hopefully we can get the community wildfire resilience plan up and running to help with these grant programs. So obviously we're doing a good job. And hopefully we get chipping in the springtime too, because I know there's a lot of people who do the trees in the springtime and it seems to be working good. I mean, obviously going in private lands is causing a bit of a rift, but if we can just go past that and then get 2 positions that are grant funded and make this place better for wildfires, that's all good. So thank you. Do I have any? Oh, let's see if you have any more questions. And we have Director Siga.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see that if we can get grant funding to have local input into fire management and mitigation, I think that's critically important, because when you're looking at a provincial level, you can draw all the lines on the maps and stuff, but you don't have the local knowledge. And I think that's where our communities come in terms of planning these, safety, fire smart, disaster plans. I think the local input's critical. And if we can get grant funding to do that, and to perhaps figure out how to keep critical roads open that are needed for emergency accesses, I think we should pursue that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions before we move on? All right, we move on.
Just one more slide before we get into our emergency management plan. So I just wanted some good news information here. Just with the support of MODI, we've been able to install tsunami inundation zone signage in the Banfield and Anakla areas, which is great for communication. And then Buoyant Alert has now expanded to include the Long Beach electoral area as well. So just wanted to share that information. And then now we move into the ACRD Disaster and Emergency Management Plan. And I just wanted to provide an update on and go back a little bit in time as to why we needed this update. And so just making note that, as you all are aware, EDMA, the Emergency Disaster Management Act, has been new legislation which takes its guidance from the Sendai framework and DRIPA. And in addition to that, though, in 2023, the ACRD adopted a bylaw that expanded the emergency management organization to include the Alberni Valley, Long Beach, and Banfield. And as part of this conversation in 2023, there was an agreement that we would consolidate the 3 emergency plans into one united plan. And so that this is what we have now done. And so this is a terrible slide. I recognize that. And I don't expect you to read all of it, but it is a slide that was taken right from EMCR, and it does highlight some of the key policy shifts that have happened through legislation. And so if you ignore everything on the slide, but maybe just look at the blue section there, these are the key policy changes that have happened. So emergency management plans need to include all 4 phases of emergency management, not just response. We need to discuss disaster risk reduction practices. It needs to include risk assessments. It needs to include climate change. The general overarching understanding is that we have to work together as networks and collaborate together as communities, that emergencies know no jurisdiction. So we have to collaborate and cooperate with each other, and recognizes the authority of the First Nations. Needs to include and acknowledge cultural safety, and really is just about regional resiliency and sharing resources, and recognizing that many communities have had to be host communities as well. So it might not be necessarily happening to your community, but you may be affected by trying to help a nearby community. So those are just the general EDMA key policy shifts that are guiding the emergency management plan. So what's new? So we've got these 3 plans that were existing currently. They're existing, the Alberni Valley, the Banfield, and Long Beach, and they are being consolidated into one ACRD disaster and emergency management plan. And this is, as I just mentioned, part of the bylaw that we have. And one thing that's new, and so I'm just highlighting, I realize and I appreciate so much that you read 175 pages of the plan. Thank you so much for doing that, Director Boyko, much appreciated. But I'm going to give a snapshot of some of the things that are new in the plan and some of the things that are going to stay the same. So one of the things that is new is the composition of the policy group, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's new, but it's now in the plan. So it's very clear now in the plan, and it wasn't in the plan before. So this is our emergency management organization. These are the 3 groups that are outlined in our bylaw. So we have the Emergency Executive Committee, which is us here today. We've got the Emergency Network Committee, or sorry, Emergency Network that meets 4 times, and it's really a very operational group. So that's where we meet with the RCMP and the ambulance and different interested parties. And then we also have the Emergency Program Leadership Group as well. And then this is when an EOC needs to open, this provides guidance around who is the policy group. And so now this is what's in the emergency plan, and this wasn't there before. So it is really spelled out nicely now. So in event occurring within the city of Port Alberni, the policy group is the mayor, city council, and the city CIO. If it occurs only on the outside of city of Port Alberni, then it is the policy group is the ACRD board and the ACRD CIO. And if it affects both of our areas, then it is a blended policy group with the mayor, the ACRD chairperson, and both CIOs. So that's more well-defined in this plan than it has been in the past. So the plan incorporates, and you'll see in the plan, it's very clear that it incorporates the 4 phases of emergency management. So mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. It interweaves the HRVA that we've had done previously, and it identifies the most consequential and the most likely hazards that we're going to have and the impacts. It also mentions climate change and what is happening now might not be what happens in the future. And there's some trends that are going to be pushing some hazards to be more likely than others. It includes the EDMA requirements. And so it discusses that we have to have emergency management plans, business continuity plans, and consult and collaborate with First Nations. It now includes Buoyant Alert and Alert Ready BC, which wasn't there before. And it makes reference to the updates to the response and recovery powers. So the state of local emergencies, because there's been some changes legislatively on how that works. And these are the key concepts and emergency management best practices. So right now, this is when I'm talking about emergency management, these are the catchwords and the phrases that come up all the time. So vulnerability, recognizing that everybody is impacted from the same disaster differently. And that may depend on the hazard. So if you have an extreme heat hazard, it could be seniors who are more vulnerable. Whereas if it's a tsunami, it could be those in the inundation zone that are more vulnerable. So what vulnerability means isn't a static term, but who is vulnerable to a disaster might be different based on the disaster or based on their circumstances in their personal life, and that too changes over time. So it's just important to note that people will be affected differently. It is also important to note that we take a resilience-based approach to emergency management, that people are innately resilient and they will need support and help, absolutely, temporarily, but they also need to be in control and have a sense of control over their own lives. And so, and they make good choices for what is best for them. Disaster risk reduction, We know that mitigation costs a lot less than response. So we need to put the work in for preparedness and mitigation to try to reduce our response and our recovery efforts. Culturally safe, and this is just making sure that everyone is treated fairly and equitably, and that everybody has access to resources to ensure their safe recovery as well. Volunteer management, this recognizes that volunteers will come out of the woodwork. Whether you necessarily want the help or not, they will be coming. So we have to have plans, and there will be convergent volunteers. There will be groups that will try to fill in the gaps of what they think needs to be done. And so it's important to invest in and recognize that we need a good volunteer management plan. Resource management is just about coordinating and reducing redundancy. So we're using our supplies, equipment, and manpower effectively. And it was spoken about earlier, so this is great. Local knowledge is the best knowledge. We know our own communities better than anyone. So it's important to have that local knowledge. Equity and inclusivity, obviously key aspects of fair services, and having regional resilience. And really, when we're taking on recovery practices, that we're doing so in a way that we're really looking into the long-term future, and we're making decisions that are good for sustainable services in the future, and ones that don't cause inadvertent harm as we move down the line. So that was a lot that has changed. And then I was going to chat about things that have stayed the same. And here are some consistent concepts that still apply. And a lot of the response part of the emergency management plan has stayed the same. We are required to have annual training and exercises. We're going to continue to use BSEMs. We will follow incident command system. We will follow the EOC organizational structure and the response levels. The roles and responsibilities of the agencies have stayed the same. And the authority to activate the EOC has stayed the same. And the hazard specific guidance has stayed the same as well. So those are the things about the guide that haven't changed. And open to discussion and feedback, and actually have a topic that I'll bring to the table too. But first we can start with some feedback from the group.
Okay, sure. I have a question. And then Councilor Holt has a question, and then Director Boyko. Mine goes back a few slides, quite a few slides, actually. When you go to the response, but keep going back, keep going. Oh, there. So you're saying the policy group is 3 people inside the city, 15 people in the middle one outside the city, and 4 people if it incorporates both. Is that what I'm reading? So there's no counselors in the city that'll be part of the group? No, on the policy group on the far side. That one says 15 people. That one says 4. So if it's events occurring in the city of Port Alberni and the ACRD, there'll be 4 people that'll be making the policy group. And there'll be 15 if it's outside the city. How come it reduces down so low?
The discussion at the time is really how to make it an effective decision, and then through that group have the dissemination of information. So if it's within the city, it's not that the city isn't part of it, but we have to, at the time, the discussion that we identified was that would be the better policy group for exchanges. And what we have not done is iron out how information goes from that group out to the other elected officials, right? And so that is part of the communications grant that we're looking at. So that would be an amendment at the end of the day. But for the sake of policy group discussions, policy group decision making, that is what was identified in the bylaw.
Okay, so my second question is then you'll have 4 people making decisions for what would normally be 2 big boards. That would be exempt from the input, but we'd be liable for the output. Well,
when the EOC is activated, right? So the policy group does have a role, but they're not directing operations. So operations would have a different role. And so yes, so there is that. I mean, there's a liability in terms of your community, for sure. But this is really about where exchanges are taking place, where information flows. And at the end of the day, like, one of the key roles of our policy group is that communication outward. And at the end of the typical structure that we would see is the chair is responsible for communications for the regional district, and the mayor is responsible for those communications within the city. And so they are both there. Now, the CAOs are actually the green vests that are in charge of the EOCs and the operations. So that group of four represents where key operations are actually taking place. The inward operations through CAOs, and the outward operations through chairs and mayors.
No, I feel like I'm being left out in the dark, right? Because if it's outside the ACRD, outside the city, then there's 15 people will make the decision. But if it's a really bad disaster, there's 4.
Well, yes and no. Like, again, back to that dissemination of information, right? So depending where the emergency originates and where it is. So if it's outwards, yes, there's a larger group through the board. That is part of that. Part of the discussion of that policy group is going to be established who's speaking to whom. So, I see Director Boyko's hand is up, so he'll have an answer. He'll have an ability to comment. But if the emergency is in Beaufort, it would be reasonable that Director Boyko be the key spokesperson. Now, it's outside of the city, and that would be identified. An emergency rarely just sits in one area. So if it was in the valley, you would have appropriately residents turning to whoever the director is seeking that information. And so as a policy group, we'd want to make sure that the right people within that policy group are informed. If we can learn from some of the wildfires that we've seen over the few years, is what the policy group typically does very quickly is they identify a key spokesperson, and then they identify an internal information sharing role somewhere within that policy group. So in our case, I'll use as an example, it could very well be that the chair is our key public speaker, but the vice chair is in charge of coordination of information going to the rest of the board and elected officials. Now, that is stuff that we haven't yet fleshed out, but we may want to flesh out and when we go through our communication strategy. So it's so that no one is left in the dark is the point, right? So the fact that there's a policy group, larger or smaller, should not dictate that anyone is left out in the dark. It simply means that there's a slightly different model depending on where the emergency is currently taking place.
I have Director Boyko, and then do I have Councillor Souza, and then Director Cote. Director Boyko, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to thank Karen for putting this all together. On the distribution list, everybody is on there that's a staff person or firefighter, but there's no directors, city councilors, mayors. That should be added to the distribution list when things change. If you go to page 112, which would be the page numbers in the big numbers, like the big bold numbers, there was a huge tsunami in Anakla that is not on that map for some reason. But my big thing starts on page 153. I kind of want every director and person actually go have a look at that if they have the ability. So this goes into local authority response power designation matrix. Now this comes from the BC website, but it is not required to be implemented at a local level, ACRD or city. I'm going to go through some of the things that are identified in these 2.5 pages, but they're very alarming. And if you haven't read them, you should have a look now because they speak to vast government overreach. It speaks to things like identifying all supplies of everybody on the region and redistributing them, rationing them. If you have a qualified person, you can change what they're doing for their job and get them to do another job that they're qualified for. So if you've got an electrician's wiring a house, you can say, you don't do that anymore. You got to go do this other job now. You can appropriate private property for any use you want, use and control use of any land, demolish structures as deemed necessary, authorize entry without a warrant on any property. Let's see. You can block evacuees or force evacuations of people and animals. You can control, prohibit travel. All this is decided by unelected people. And we talked earlier about trusted sources. And if we vote and make this in the ACRD, we're going to lose the trust of the people like that. Giving the government power like this is not required in the ACRD. And I'm going to make a motion right now to get rid of this section, these 2.5 pages, as they are not required and not necessary. Thank you.
Okay, so you'll make a motion to remove this section, and is it being seconded? Seconded by Director Roth. I'll get, Daniel, do you want to speak on this first?
Well, are you speaking to the section that is about evacuation orders?
If you go to page 153, local authority response power designation matrix, this form is optional and only an example. We do not need to implement it at the ACRD level, and I want to remove page 153, 154, and 155. So that when we say we are going to accept this update, those 3 pages are not in there. Because the ability for vast government overreach is put here in great detail, and it scares the bejesus out of people.
Well, you're the chair, yeah.
Sure, I can speak on that for a sec. So under the Fire Services Act, which I happen to be a fire chief and so did Director Beckett. It's in the Fire Services Act, you can do this. You can demolish houses as you see fit in the Fire Services Act. You can remove people as you see in the, so it's already in other acts. It's not being invoked in that way, but it is. So in the case of a fire that's going to take other buildings, yes, we have brought in demolition crews to smack buildings down to stop a fire. So we have used this when we have pushed people out of their houses. So I know you said it's overreach, but actually it's already in the Fire Services Act, and it is.
So, but I'm going to talk about something different. This is not a fire act. This is an emergency powers act for local government. So we can say we have some emergency, and you can tell an electrician to change his job and enter his property with his warrant, take his supplies and redistribute on other people. That's not a fire thing. This is a lot different. Just to point that out to the chair. So when you read these 3 pages and where it comes from in the BC Government Act, it is not required at the local level, and I'd like it to be removed. And if you say we already have powers like that in the Fire Act, why do we need to repeat it? And let's get rid of this. And this will be a recorded vote too. Thank you.
Okay.
So what this is doing is reflecting what exists in terms of ministerial powers under the state of a declaration of a state of emergency. And so what our plan does is simply identify how that power through the state of an emergency, which the minister gets, provincial legislation, not ours, and then how that is enacted when we declare that state of emergency, and then we're assigned to do the evacuations, to act in terms of an immediate response. So I guess the confusion I have is that if it is seen as an overreach, then the issue is one that we should be following up with the province, because they're the ones who actually have created an act where they have these powers. Now, those powers are then delegated to the appropriate staff that are tasked with the implementation of these activities.
Daniel, I do agree, and I got the BC Government Act in front of me here. And 107, for the purposes of the division of local authority made by blah, 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 do all the things. So it already exists at the provincial level. It does not need to, even on the words on that page, does not need to exist at the local level. And having the ability for unelected people to enact powers like this, such as enter properties without a warrant, is quite disturbing. And we don't need to have it, and I'd like to have it removed. Thank you.
So through the chair, so I guess where I'm confused is how then would staff do their work? So if there, let's say is a flood and we're having to take whatever action on private property, what I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would prefer that we go through a process of seeking a proper warrant to access private property in order to do the work that needs to be done.
Of course, we need a warrant to do that work that's done, but that being said, it lays it out in the BC government thing of what will happen. And it also says we don't need to have this dedicated and written down at the local level.
And perhaps we can seek clarity from the province, but my understanding is that our plan needs to speak to that. And as a requirement of the development of our emergency response plans. And so I think in terms of the practicality, it would be virtually impossible for me as an EOC director to direct actions on private or public property if I had to stop and reach out and seek a warrant that in a non-emergency realm I would have to do, which completely makes sense. But in the state of an emergency, how would I be directing people to take action if I didn't have sort of a framework on how the provincial act applies to us here locally? I guess I'm confused as to what you're proposing we do instead of this.
The powers are laid out. Let's make sure I'm off mute here. Powers are laid out in the provincial thing how to do it. Now, this local response power designation matrix, this form's optional and example. May choose to designate officials as they fees fit, consider requirements of section 19. I don't know what section 19 is. It's not referenced in here, but it should be to get more details. But when you read through the response powers, they're very concerning. And I hope all the directors had a chance in the last 10 minutes to have a good read of them and can now talk on it as well. Thank you.
And yeah, I have Director Ross, Director Siga, Director Cote. And Councilors, sorry. And Councilor. Okay, so we're gonna go with Director Ross.
I just agree that it's the government overreach is alarming. And it does say at the beginning, at the top of the form, that it's optional and it's only used as an example. And local authorities may choose to designate, which is the word may, not must, choose to designate individuals on behalf of the local authority as they see fit, as provided in section 19. And then down further, when it talks about section 19, it says how it has to be done. So I do agree this shouldn't be in there. It shouldn't be a part of our local plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Siga.
Thank you. I'm of the opposite mind just because of the recent incidences in Jasper. The lack of ability of local people to make decisions to act caused a situation where damage was worse. So I would much rather have the control at the local level and all of the information up front with who has the ability to make these decisions written right into our local document, as opposed to the province having the final say on actions that need to be taken locally. So I'm of the opposite mind. I think we should take control of this and decide within our policy groups who makes these decisions as to where action needs to be taken. So no, I would say leave it in, and if there's any fine tuning that needs to be done as to who has these abilities to make the decisions, let's take it to that level.
Thank you for that. Director Cote.
Thank you. I agree with what Director Siga just said. Because I'm aware of what these 2.5 pages say, because I have been part of the emergency management team on the regional district for 19 years now. This has always been part of the conversation ongoing in the past. Right at the beginning, it says the person must be a member of the local authority's emergency management organization. So there is a team that's beyond the policy group here that actually have the plan on how to respond to emergencies. If there's a big response that's required province-wide, we won't have the province here to help to take on this authority. And I've seen it firsthand with Dog Mountain Fire. If we had more local control, had been aware that we had this, you know, we might not have lost one of the structures. Community took it upon themselves to actually stop another structure from being taken down. And that's what happens when you don't have a plan and you don't have the right authorities established going forward. So sorry, I can't support taking this out. I think that it really needs to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sola.
Yeah, I've been on the team for a long time and we've had this discussion a lot and we have fine-tuned it in others aspects of this document. But I'm just kind of curious to know, first of all, if somebody enters the property, if we have to enter the property or take down a house or a garage or whatever, for whatever reason, there is money in the emergency. If you call the state of emergency, there is money to give that back. There is dollars involved, I believe, and I'll let you answer that first.
So when we declare a state of emergency, that emergency has to be approved by the province. The province gives us a task number. And then the activities that we take place relevant to that fall within the parameters of the Provincial Act. And so the province, in essence, is taking on the costs associated with our activities. We have regular check-ins. We have a whole format of applications for actions that continue going through, and there's a chain of approval locally in our EOC that then also culminates with the province. So there's checks and balances in terms of what activities are taking place and how those costs are being borne. So without having the specifics in hand, I would say yes, that there are controls in place. I think I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing an overreach, and I'm also hearing that it's within the act. And I will express that my understanding of everything that we've identified in the updated plan are criteria that are within the realm of what is in the Provincial Act. So there's two things that we have to bear in mind, is that one, we are not in a position to overreach and give ourselves powers beyond what the province has assigned within the Act, nor are we within a position to fetter the aspects of what is within the Act. We can't arbitrarily change the Act. And so now, if there is a lack of clarity there, perhaps what we want to do is make sure that we are clear on that, and we can do additional due diligence and create another form so that we're clear on that. But we are not looking to, and we cannot legally go beyond what is given to us through the Act, through the province.
It's just to keep following up, and I have a few questions here. So when there's a state of emergency, we'll end up going with the Provincial Act, not necessarily our own. So in the Provincial Act, this is basically in the same thing. It's all in there. So if we took it off or left it on, it's still provincial. And we follow the Provincial Act from there on a state of emergency.
I mean, the provincial guidelines, the Act is ultimately what is guiding. Now, we need a local plan that clarifies, how it is that we're implementing activities, so that when we do our training, we're clear. I think what I'm concerned with is the liability that I or other staff would take on if we are saying that we're going to do things different than what is inside the act, because that creates a conflict where my concern, just without doing more due diligence, is that we would be saying the province says one thing, but we're going to do something of a lesser standard or lesser reach. And my concern is that in dealing with an emergency, if we've created a legal gap, it is staff making decisions that are sitting in that gap, and I do not like the way that looks.
I think also I hear the concern, and I might be wrong, is who is going to say, yes, you can go on and do whatever on the property, or, you know, go into a store and say, take all their shovels or whatever. That's just, they're little things, but, that's really important, where that command, and we've had that discussion in the past, who is in control of that? And that's might be something we need to clarify even more so in this document. So that's one thing. I'll wait for this topic to be finished and then ask my other questions if that's okay.
So that is a good question, because in terms of the way the emergency operation center works is that we actually have a logistics person that's calling around and identifying where sources of certain things exist and looking to acquire them. So if we can rent, we'll rent. If we have to purchase, we'll purchase. Ultimately, they are doing that research and looking at what is available and at what cost we can secure it. A great example is during our road closures. So during a road closure, we knew that we were consuming in the valley somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 liters of fuel a day. And so we knew that, you know, based on reaching out to where those sources were, we knew that we had a very limited window of time prior to running out of fuel. And so two key things occurred. We started calling around to see where we could get more fuel coming into the Alberni Valley, and where it is that we could ensure that our emergency services and response, everything from you know, nursing, where we have people going to homes to help out, through to our ambulance and whatnot, and RCMP having access to fuel. So we were calling to make sure that we secured those. We secured one for emergency services at a card lock, and the other we actually called around to see, you know, there was a deep sea barge that could be brought in. There were so many different options that could be brought in. Now, at the end of the day, we were then discussing the viability of each one of those things with the province in order to get those costs approved. And the province ultimately gave us direction on whether or not we could proceed with a deep sea barge or proceed with another route. So there's a lot of moving parts that are going on, and a lot of discussion, research, and decisions that are taking place. Again, I'll express that it's potentially concerning to create a framework that the province would be looking at as they make decisions and we submit things that is different than the framework we place on ourselves. That would be really problematic.
Okay, I have Director Boyko, then Director Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're having some really good discussions here. One of the things that Councillor Solis said was a very good point, I think, is who has the power to say what, where, when? Because when you read it, it could be an employee, a manager, it could be anybody, but it's not elected officials that are making decisions and things like that, which is one of the concerning things when you bring in emergency powers. So you could have a person that works for the ACRD or someone else saying, okay, go here, they got lots of cows, let's take care of those and redistribute them or something like that. And that's what raises the hackles of everybody in the farming industry and things like that has been communicated to me of why are we doing this? Why do we have this local power? It exists in the province level already. Why do we need to have it here? And my motion stands. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, that's that.
Thank you. One of the who, if I can answer that one, is partly the EOC director would be making those decisions around resource allocation. and logistics and operations at an EOC level. So that would be going up through the Green Vest, and who would be connecting with the policy group. And I don't have it in front of me, but I'm almost certain that the policy group, one of the responsibilities is talking to community, but also the broader resource allocation around the policy group. So it'll be great to have the training coming up, because I really think that's going to indicate that there is power at the elected officials levels to talk about broader resources. And then at the provincial level, if this was an earthquake or something really wide in scope, and it was now provincially where we had provincial, then the province actually takes over resource allocation as to what area needs it. And they have that power. And whether we take it out of this or not, they still have the power to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Roth.
Yes, I agree. I think that the ACRD could overstep their mandate. It should be handled by the province. And I'm thinking, right now about interface fires and wildfires. There's a Ministry of Forest office in town on Cherry Creek Road, and that it's the Alberni District Office. I've actually worked out of there. They've got lots of local knowledge. They've got professionals. So why wouldn't we work with them rather than take on that responsibility, or even go in there? Like, why do it when there's already a provincial government, probably more than just the Ministry of Forest, but there's already oversight in that area? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Daniel, do you want to respond?
We do coordinate with all the agencies, and so at the end of the day, that is part of the role of the Emergency Operations Center, is that we are coordinating with all available agencies in order to respond to an emergency. Now, it's certainly, I have never come across it in my 20 years, but if the board does not want their own staff making decisions or leading an emergency operation center, that is fine. We can approach the province and say, we want you to run it. But everywhere else I've always been, it ends up being trained staff that end up occupying the roles within emergency operations center and doing this research and doing this work. And again, I'll echo that when it comes to access to key resources, and I'll say the gradual increase of powers and how that power is applied on the ground is always something that goes back ultimately to the minister. And so the minister's staff is following their guidelines and policies and helping in those decisions. But the EOC director is not in a position to act in a way that is out of proportion with the emergency response that is deemed to be appropriate for that event. And that's why we have these plans. The plans sort of identify what actions we would expect to see in a tsunami, what actions we'd expect to see in a wildfire or earthquake. The EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, is acting within the frameworks of the powers that are provided to them through the minister and through that ministry, which is why all this paperwork and all this back and forth is taking place in rapid order with the province. So I guess the alternative is to say, no, we want the province to do it, which is fair enough, but I don't see how that's going to better serve the community. Karen, speak first, and I'll speak, hopefully.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, I did find the page number where my mind was referencing. It's on page 55, and it's page 55 of the document. So it'll say in the right-hand corner, page 55 of 175, but it does list all the key EOC positions and the roles and responsibilities. And so it does talk about the function of the policy group specifically, and we just were mentioning resource allocation. So I just wanted to make mention there where it says the policy group offers high-level decision-making and support, particularly on issues that have broad implications such as public messaging and resource allocation. So that was the piece that I was remembering. And provides overall policy direction, authorizes declaration, policy directives, provides direction on public information activities, and may act as the official spokesperson. So that provides some context around the roles of the policy group. I don't know if that's helpful, but that was what I was remembering when I said the resource allocation.
Thank you for that. I'll give my little 2 cents first, because why not? So being in emergency response and being the fire chief for 12 years, I had obviously a badge, had some powers to it. And most of these powers you're talking about are inside the fire chiefs. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to access because of the emergency. They can't go too far outside the realm, but I had the ability to take down fences and buildings and get people, say arrested, but just confined for the duration of the incident because they're being, So it looks to the outside person that this actually is a huge overreach, but there is reasons for it. I remember one time we were doing it was the tsunami sirens went off for some reason, and we were driving around town doing evacuations and stuff. We were running low on fuel. We went to the fuel station at the time, and we tried getting in to get fuel, and the people there would not let us get in the lineup. We had to go to the back of the lineup with everybody else because they were not giving access to fuel. So this would give us access to fuel at the time, which we didn't have. We had a radio that we had to go out of service until we get fuel. So somebody else did give us fuel at the time to get us going back on the ground. But the people there were more concerned with getting fuel for their vehicle than they were getting the fire trucks back on the road to help the people. So it does look like overreach from the person outside, but being in the system, you sometimes need this. You sometimes need to confine people from going in areas they shouldn't go in, because we know when a tsunami siren hits, people go with their lawn chairs down to the road to see if they can see the wave coming in. And why put the responders' life in jeopardy to try and save these people after the fact if you can stop them from going down there so he controls the area? So I know that it looks like overreach, and it does look like overreach, but in emergency, you need this document. And I've lived the life, so I know that part of it. I'll just say that. And any more questions, or should we call questions been called? So we're going to vote. This will be a recorded vote. I don't know you're recording over there. Okay, so it'll be a recorded vote. So all those in favor of the motion, put your hand up. I have Director. Would you read the motion back? Can you read the motion back, please? Yeah. You have the motion to read?
Sorry,
Oh, we have
just-
a motion over here. Hold on. I think Daniel. No, this is the motion. The motion Fred made. Sorry.
so
Yes.
this is what I recorded, and just let me know if it's correct.
Okay.
That the Emergency Program Executive Committee adopt the ACRD Disaster and Emergency Management Plan with the removal of pages 150, that's the pages of the document, not the plan, but the local authority response power designation matrix.
Director Boyko, does that reflect your motion?
Yeah, that sounds good. Just to remove those 3 pages. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the motion. Okay, all those in favor of removing the pages? I have Director Ross, Director Boyko. Okay, all those opposed to removing the pages? I have Director Siga, Director Beckett, Director Cote, Councillor Solda, myself, Director Sparrow. And I believe that is everybody. So motion has been defeated. All right. Any more discussion? One discussion, please. Oh, on that discussion page, yes, the motion has been defeated. Yes. Okay, Councillor Solda. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is regarding where am I going? When we talk about key concepts, right? That's way at the other beginning and maybe in some other pages. you have the key concepts, but okay, so the regional district has adopted the accessibility plan and the province has adopted the accessibility. We had to have an accessibility plan, but I don't see that as one of the key concepts to me that is important because the accessibility could mean many, many things. And I think that should be in there. I don't know if anybody else agrees or disagrees. I just think that's really important to put it in since we are provincially legislated to have an accessibility plan.
My comment to that is, and maybe it can be spelled out better because if that was not how it read, but it's under vulnerability. That's the category, because it could be people with physical disabilities, people with mental health disabilities. It could just be, like I say, with heat, it's just that seniors are more inclined to feel the effects of heat. It could be due to socioeconomic barriers. There are that word vulnerability has a broad context based on the scenario at hand. So in my mind, that accessibility piece was under that category and a very important piece, but that was under the vulnerability section.
And I thought the same thing, but because it's provincial and it might be like a slash added to that, because then it just opens up. Because when we look at the vulnerability, we're thinking of homelessness. I think of that because that's how we've been classifying that right now because it's so out there, right? And other people might go in the same route. I'm just think it looks good on the paperwork for grants and stuff on top of that.
Thank you for that comment. I'll relook at that section. And it could also make reference within this plan. It makes reference and makes connections with other related plans and documents. So that might be a good one to make that correlation with.
Yeah, and one more thing too is when we go to the ACRD, if there's a state of emergency in the ACRD, and you had mentioned, the chair had mentioned about the city and that, it would be great to make sure that the mayor or even the mayor is notified of what's happening in the ACRD because they all connect into the city. You have to come through the city anyways, so we need to have some connection that what's going on because I'm sure the mayor would or our CAO will get, hey, what's going on? And we can fan it. We don't know anything about it, but we could fan it back into the ACRD policy group and say, this is what we're getting. So it might be something that you might want to look into in the communication part of it.
Okay, thank you. I got one little bit here. That's on page 120 of your 129 of the agenda. And it's the second paragraph near the bottom, and it says Lacey Lake Dam number 1 could flood downstream properties 12.6 minutes from the breach. And Lacey Lake Dam number 1 could flood downstream properties 14.4 minutes after the dam breach. So one of them supposed to be 1, supposed to be 2. So there's a little typo there. Page 129 of the agenda, page 120 is the last. It's in the second to last paragraph and the second and a half last sentence of the paragraph. It's right below all the bullet points. It says it's estimated that floodwaters, and you read halfway through that paragraph, it says Lacey Lake Dam number 1, and below it is Lacey Lake Dam number 1. So yeah, it's a small typo, but you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Does anybody else have any questions at this time? Okay, hearing none, that was a good discussion. That was item 4, presentation.
I do have one more thing. Sorry, it was one slide. I wasn't sure if this is the appropriate place to bring it up, but I just wanted to make note that currently in this plan, that it is a requirement to open up an EOC that we have an EMCR task number from the province. So that's what's written in the plan. That was written in the old plan. That's what's written in the new plan. So it says an EMCR task number is required to open an EOC. And I just wanted to put it in front of you and have that discussion and note that there was In 2024, there was 4 instances where we went to EMCR and asked for a task number, and we were not provided with a task number. So we did not open up an EOC, or there was, so we had to navigate that. So I just wanted to put that out there and let you have a discussion around that.
It was one of those things with a closure for the road and non-task number.
Yeah, it was, I can share. Yeah, okay. So there was 4 instances. There was, so the first instance was the road closure, Highway 4, where there was some local discussion around wanting to keep the reception center open longer than it was. But the province, I think it was around 36 hours. And then when the alternative route was opened, EMCR said all ESS is closed. So there was that one. There was also at Christmas time, if you remember, the road closed for a short period of time, and we reached out for a task number to get ESS support, and we were denied the task number. There was also some inquiries around opening up an EOC to help with the Port Pub situation, to see if we could help with some coordination there, and we phoned to get a task number. We were denied. And then also again around this immigration issue that we had in town as well. So and so 4 times we were denied a task number, and so we didn't open up. Actually, I shouldn't say that. At the Christmas time, we did proceed with some ESS, but it was decided amongst the board that we would pay for that. In the end, the province did pay for it, but at the time it was uncertain. So.
Well, thank you for that. I see a hand on my right. Councilor Sola?
I think there was another incident too with the city. The city had the fire and it was in the by the hospital, and we couldn't have Daniel, you know more about that. So maybe you could explain how that worked.
Yeah, I think that was less of a request for a task number and more of a request for action. So that was a jurisdictional issue where the fire started in the city, spread to forestry lands and in the regional district. And the province took the position that because it started in the city should continue chasing it up the mountains as it be turned into a wildfire. So that's still an issue that we have to follow up, because that was ludicrous. At the end of the day, we had the fire service, the provincial fire service, ready to attack, being told that they couldn't attack even though they were on scene. We had the city that put out their portion of the fire, and then I think we ended up with Cherry Creek Fire Department that ended up responding, even though it was in Cherry Creek, but not necessarily within their jurisdiction. That was a beautiful cluster of what happens when we do not clarify written plans with the province around jurisdictional issues. And I would argue it's the same thing that occurred in the absence of a written plan with the province when it came to Christmas Day and a highway closure and an inability to get people that were legitimately stuck on this side or on the other side of Highway 4 into a hotel room for the night. So the province on that one, when we acted, we got to go ahead to put people in hotels on our side, and the province later backtracked and said, yeah, you were right, we were wrong, and reimbursed us. But it's one of those moments where you're going like, this is a lack of clarity between the province and us as local government, but also not at a very large scale, even though the fire could have become and did grow quite quickly. Some of these emergencies weren't deemed to be huge emergencies at the time.
So how do we mitigate that this does not happen again? And is it better to go and meet the minister? And like what the next steps are? Because I mean, we can sit here at this table and talk about this all we want, but we're stuck still against, we may as well put our head on a brick wall and start banging it because we're not getting anywhere. So unless we have a meeting, the chair and the CAO move forward and have a meeting or have this discussion with the minister, since we're now got the government back.
Through the chair, yes, this is something that we need to bring to the minister to make sure that the minister directs his or her staff appropriately to actually flesh out these details so we're ready, because it's a key part of emergency response. But the other aspect to that is also asking this board whether or not they would want to create a fund, whether it's like $5,000, that allows for rapid response while we follow up with the province. Because what happens in the instance of Christmas evening is the province later reimbursed, but I picked up the phone and talked to the chair and said, this is the problem, this is the amount of people we have. I had staff over here that could give me the breakdown of who was in need. And so the chair gave me the go-ahead to, yeah, like, let's just get the hotel rooms and we'll follow up with the province, which we did successfully. Had we been unsuccessful, it would have been in the neighborhood of $1,500. But it is one of those things where we see it as being part of our response. The province at the time doesn't see it. And in the meantime, we have people in need that aren't getting any service. And that is the frustration point. So there's two aspects that we could tackle this on.
So my response to that is, I have no problem with that. But, and the other thing is, can we use some of the grant money and put it into no, we can't. I see the shake. So, I mean, I have no problem with that. I would rather do that, but I still would like to see us set up a meeting, and I don't know if you wanna, a motion on that, I'd be glad to make that, but, and add the 5,000 as an emergency response, but where are we gonna get that $5,000? Is that gonna come out of what budget? That's the next question.
Director Cote.
Thank you. AVICC is coming up for resolutions. So this may be something that we'd like to put forward through our regional district for the promise to have a fund for a response for circumstances like this. So I'll make the motion that we do a resolution to AVICC that will then be forwarded on to UBCM, because that's the process that they like.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor and seconded by Councillor Solda. Any more discussion on the motion? The motion back, or you're just going to go for it? Okay, just go for it. Just going to go for it? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? Motion carried. Okay. Do you have? Go ahead.
So if I may, through the chair, so in terms of budget, if we were to create something, if it was going to be separate from ABICC, then a resolution to have staff bring it forward in the budget discussions in terms of how and where we can do that. And if it isn't possible, we'll flag it at that point. But the appropriate time to talk about how and where in a budget would be during our budget time. Yeah.
So where would that money come from that we spent last time?
It came out of our emergency, emergency services.
So my question then is, do we really need to budget more money for this to like have a separate reserve when we could take it from where we did already?
I think where the direction comes in handy is if you want to see something held as a reserve. We would likely take a look at our emergency management services, make sure that it legally qualifies, and then set it aside. As we made the decision in the moment, then obviously in the moment, we didn't have an emergency budget meeting. We knew how big of a hit it could potentially be, and we felt we could manage it through the existing services. But rightfully, if Terry were there, she would remind us that it does or does not qualify under the existing bylaw. And that would be her role, and we would thank her for reminding us of that.
Thank you. I'd like more information then before we start making these type of motions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have Director Siga, and then I have Councillor Solda.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if perhaps a letter to the ministry that is attached to making this budget decision could be done, just to point out that there is a failure.
Okay, are you making that as a motion?
Sure.
Okay, so a motion for letter, and we have it seconded by Councillor Solda. Any discussion on the motion on the floor and discussion? Go ahead.
If we're sending a resolution to the ABICC, that should be included in that letter. Thank you.
Any more discussion on the motion on the floor? Right, all those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? Motion carried. And I see a hand up in the corner, Karen.
I think just making a comment of, so when you don't get a task number, it's EMCR's assessment that it doesn't fall within what is defined as an emergency. It doesn't, like, the example of ESS is a good one, where locally we wanted to support people. And so for us, it very much was important to us. So I just think it's important. I know some of my counterparts in other areas are having this discussion with their elected officials. And certainly emergencies have a tendency to easily scope creep too. So just, and that would have a ramification on budget and capacity and staff capacity and whatnot. But if you wanted to open up an EOC when there isn't a task number, they're starting to have that conversation around around policies, or coming back to the elected officials and saying, so we're not going to get provincial resources to open up an EOC. Do we want that? Do we want to open up an EOC anyways? But then it would have that funding. You wouldn't have the budget. You wouldn't have, and there are other ramifications around. Like I couldn't put ESS without an EOC, because without a task number, because they don't have the liabilities then and the work safe and things like that. So there would be some restrictions on what we could do too. But it is a weighty conversation, and I think it's important to think it out fully. And so there's been a couple instances where I would say locally we wanted to be able to do more, and the province was saying this is the line in the sand. And so it's interesting to have this conversation. So more of a comment than a question, but those are the things that are going through my mind.
Thank you. Director Cote?
I just had a thought about MIA and any kind of funding that they could provide us during emergency. I don't know that it could cover any kind of like hotel rooms or anything, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else. I still am on the MIA board, and we're meeting at the end of the month, so I'll ask that question. If there's any support there. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? On this discussion? Oh. All right. Does that mean we're done with item 4.1 to item 5? Correspondence for information on Bernie Valley? We haven't made a motion to receive this yet. This 7?
We already did the evacuation brochure. So that
was okay.
the disaster emergency management plan update.
Okay, so we're on item 7, request for decision, disaster management, disaster emergency management plan update. We didn't adopt it, no. There was a motion on the floor, we defeated. It would take the 3. Yes, we defeated that motion to take the 3 pages out, so we have to make the motion to adopt the plan. Does anybody want to make that motion? You want to move the motion? There a seconder on the motion, so it's moved by Councillor Solda, directed by Director Cote, directed by Director Cote. Yes, then as amended? As amended? Any questions on the motion? Go ahead, Matt.
You made some comments, some amendments in terms of a typo that was adjusted, and yeah, so there are a few verbal amendments that were provided here. Yeah.
And the forward by Daniel was very short, succinct, I know that. Very short. So any more questions on the motion to accept the plan? Okay, no more questions? Okay, can I have a vote on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Item 8, reports. No reports. Item 9, any late business? No. Item 10, question period. Any people participating in the boardroom? No. Participating on the Zoom meeting?
No, there's no questions in Zoom or in the email.
No questions on Zoom, no questions in the email. Okay. Item 11. Adjourn. So moved and seconded by David Goode. All those in favor of adjournment? Thank you. Have a great day.